Welcome to D&Dummies, boys and ghouls.
Hello and welcome to the podcast D&Dummies. This is a podcast where I explain how much D&D lore I have to all the other people here. They sort of react to it, blind react to certain parts. My twin brother is here. He knows a bit about D&D through twin osmosis. And Jay, who doesn't know anything and makes me roll my eyes. But that'll be implied throughout the entirety of this entire series.
Yeah. Frankly, D of D&Dummies came to me with an idea, and he was like, hey, there's a lot of people who like D&D lore, and there's some people who just don't know it. Wouldn't it be cool if we had a podcast where, since he knows things and I don't, he explains it to me, and then whether you know a lot or little or nothing, you have a jumping in point. Yeah. And so D&Dummies was born.
It's a summary, basically, of parts of D&D and just the oddities that come with it, the world, and that's kind of what I wanted to bring up in this episode, which is the rules lawyering and the issue that people have whenever you break the world.
Well, hang on. So you say that Sam knows a bit. He's been like the DM for most of the things I feel like I've been known of.
Yes, but the stuff he knows he gets from like the source books.
Mm-hmm. Where do you get it? A cauldron?
Various sources that are just like I try to go back as far as I can to the original sources to figure out stuff.
So... I'm like, to give it sort of a baseline, I'm like someone who knows a lot about the MCU. He's the one who knows deep comics where that they come from.
Yeah, I'd be like, did you know Gambit and Rogue are dating in a lot of versions because his power amplifying can sort of neutralize her power draining?
Here's a fun game. I'll just name a random pop culture character and you tell me what class they would be in D&D terms.
This is not your podcast.
Gambit.
Rogue, I guess. Or
no,
he'd be a monk.
Trying to piss me off.
It didn't occur to me.
I thought you were going to say a blood hunter.
No, monk would probably make the most sense.
Yeah.
Just because throwing darts and having a bow staff, that's kind of their thing.
And there's even a type of monk that can basically be focused on wielding a weapon that they can basically just into their hand whenever.
What does mean?
Like teleport it back into their hand. They get their whole
Gambit
thing.
Can't do that.
Well, my idea was because he's always got the bow staff, you can lean into it.
The bow staff's collapsible.
But can he pick up a gyro and throw it really fast? It's kind of floppy.
Presumably.
All right. So as far as
all the Pete Holmes fans are gonna love that joke.
Yes.
What if Pete Holmes listened to this?
He doesn't like fancy stuff. He says the
right.
moment you throw in realms, and he can't deal with the fact that like everyone has a British accent for some reason. And it's like, but England's a real place.
But what if we did a like German D&D? It's like, welcome to my loft.
Well,
we will be having some mutton.
It was like, hey, come on, it's a D&D over here. If you don't know, that's what invisible stalkers do. They're just, I'm stalking here.
Is an invisible stalker a D&D thing?
Yeah,
yes.
It's an elemental.
Yeah, it's an invisible creature that stalks.
What bugs me about it is the fact there's artwork of it.
Wait. Elemental, as in the element of invisibility, or is it the element of
surprise?
High five, I hate it.
I think it's air, actually, but
air.
yeah.
No, it's definitely surprise.
Whatever. You know what? Knowing how original Gary Gygax was, he had, like, he had Aunt B, one of the original D&D characters. Like, was literally just Aunt B from the Andy Griffith Show. So odds are, the Invisible Stalker was first invented, was literally the element of surprise as a joke.
You know, I heard that Aunt B was a real lich.
Do you even know what a lich is?
I know it sounds like another word.
It comes from, I believe it's a term, lichen. It's a Welsh term meaning a corpse.
Well, I stand by what I said. I'm pretty sure she's dead.
Anyway.
Yeah.
I assume you had something...
Lawyering.
Yeah, rules lawyering. Basically, people will say, like the Hand of Vecna.
Mm-hmm.
It's an artifact that existed in first edition. It's actually older than the character Vecna.
From Stranger Things?
No. You had such a look in your eye, I was worried what would happen when I stopped talking. But people say, like, that, if his hand was destroyed by this deity or whatever, then it can't show up again. There are people who are like, well, I wanted it for over here. Like, there was a kind of a hissy fit in 5th edition.
How many editions have there been?
5.
Okay, because we're about to get 10th edition Warhammer.
We're
40K.
moving towards 6th, though.
You guys are slow. Well, not you specifically.
Yeah, well, the D&D, like, the Ring of Winter is like this artifact that is kind of like the One Ring, makes you immortal, and grants you tons of power. Like, you could basically destroy anyone else. Like, turn people to ice, make ice constructs that fight for you.
Tell your goons to sing and dance to Frosty the Snowman. That's a Batman and Robin joke.
I got it.
Thank you.
But it was put in an adventure, and that's what made people mad, because the adventure is located on, like, a jungle island.
That's not cold.
Well, the ring itself is not cold. It doesn't, like, change its environment.
What's it called?
The Ring of Winter.
So,
it grants you ice powers.
Okay.
But people were upset because the guy who had it last, he was up in the mountains up in this part of the continent. And that's where it was last heard from. So why is it now here?
Because he went on vacation.
Well, he can't really leave the ring.
So he's dead.
It's kind of like the One Ring if there was no Sauron to, like, pit to throw it into.
Yeah, but
so he basically...
You can just chop his fingers off.
Well, no. The thing is, it will fall into evil hands if people use it. So he actually uses his willpower and Shrev just, like, says, I'm going to seclude myself in the mountains where it can't hurt anyone. And because he doesn't age, because of the ring, he basically has been sitting in the mountains for thousands of years.
Okay.
Yeah, and he had, like, a whole novel series about him...
Sitting?
No, him trying to run from people trying to get the ring. But people were upset that, like, why is he now in this area? And it's like, frickin' because fun, that's why. And that's kind of... The rule of cool is very much a thing in Warhammer 40k. But D&D...
My preferred sphere of dominion.
Crystal sphere. And also, that's another thing that sometimes you might say, crystal spheres are stupid. We're not doing that. And no one can really tell you no.
There's a crystal sphere where crystal spheres aren't crystal spheres.
I hate that sentence.
They're obsidian cubes.
I wish you were far off.
Oh, God.
I wish you were far off.
Okay, so, for real, though, side tangent, Vecna and Stranger Things, like the joke I always make, and in D&D, are they similar in any facet at all? Or is it just, don't spook him, I call him Vecna?
Vecna...
That's my guy without teeth.
As far as I know from Stranger Things, it's basically he became this conduit of all the upside down stuff.
Yeah, he's squishy Dr. Manhattan.
Yeah. Vecna, and he'll probably get his own episode just going through his whole bucket of lore that is insane.
I'm gonna do my best not to make Stranger Things jokes, because
well, here's the thing. People were like, oh, he was attacked by this guy named Cass. And he was a vampire warlord fighter who slaughtered he drank the blood from battlefields that he conquered.
Oh, thirsty.
Yeah, and he was a side character in Vecna's story. Yeah, but he's also the one who was like, oh, you're ascending to godhood now, Vecna? No, I'm taking over now. And he kicked him off, like, the throne where all the god power was gonna go, and he's like, I'm taking it. And Vecna was like, no, I'm taking it, and, like, shot stuff at him, and they fought, and then Vecna got his hand chopped off by Cass.
Okay, generally speaking, the story is they destroy each other.
Oh.
Yeah.
Except for Vecna's eye and hand.
Yeah, the eye and hand got, like... Because basically they were fighting in a room that was being pumped filled with god energy. So they both kind of exploded, becoming demigods. Like,
depending on the interpretation.
Vecna got most of it, because he was actually trained on how to do it. In one version, Cass got none of it. And literally his hatred for Vecna was so potent, it, like, tainted the blade. And that's the first reference to Cass you have, is the Sword of Cass, which has this intelligence and is like, you need to kill Vecna. I will give you all the power I can. We are going to kill Vecna together. And that's just a magic item. That's literally the first mention of Cass, is the blade saying, oh yeah, Vecna was a guy, he died, they fought each other.
I'm just imagining getting a weapon in, like, Skyrim's Sword of Salt. Does critical damage to Vecna.
Salt?
Yeah, because he's salty. He's mean. He's upset. He's curmudgeoned. He's probably wishing he could sit in a frost temple doing nothing and having books written about him. I understand D&D very well.
So yeah, but there are people who get all upset when you change lore, and that's the thing. The first mention of Vecna opens with "Legend has it," which is basically them saying, make up stuff, it doesn't matter. Which 40K does a good job being like,
yeah,
whatever, we basically just have fun with it. We create these rules more as inspiration, jumping off points.
They're more like guidelines anyway.
Yeah. But
that's Pirates of the Caribbean.
With a lot of people are like, the guns that Matt Mercer made are like too overpowered because it's basically you're rolling a D10 at range. And people are like, that's...
Wait, D10 to decide the range you can shoot at, or...?
That's damage, just a D10, which is... I think it's about as much as a two-handed longsword.
I haven't been stabbed by a longsword, but I feel like being shot by a gun and being stabbed by a longsword would be equally painful.
Yeah, there are people who get all upset about that, and they're like, no, it should just be like a crossbow, but flavored different, and it's...
So, like, Doritos nacho cheese.
It's some bullcrap that people get all upset about. I am not a fan of it. Now, because there are also some issues...
You're not a fan of the guns?
I'm not a fan of people getting all upset about stuff.
Well, yeah, I'm fine with the guns.
One thing that got upset was my favorite D&D character and the logo for D&Dummies, a Sararak. He was... Basically, he transformed himself from a lich to a demi-lich, which is supposed to be, like, more powerful. Basically, he can just project his consciousness anywhere. But when he shows up in the latest adventure, he's a lich again. And there's some rules where, like, oh, yeah, he could totally turn back if he wanted to, if he, didn't want to just be a pile of bones in a corner. Also, I'll save it for the Spelljammer episode.
Oh, so someday we're really going to actually do that instead of setting me up like a fool?
Do you want me to
No, not now.
Okay. Yeah, we'll be doing episodes talking about D&D lore and everything.
So
this episode's a nightmare because we can't stay on topic, and
because you just kind of... You were like, I just have an idea. I was like, oh, cool. Like, what's it going to be? And you're like, we'll tell you whenever we start.
Yeah, because if I try and tell you, you guys are just going to think... And also, I'm bringing up, like, rules lawyer and things. Somehow, you guys got sidetracked.
Well, to be fair, if you had said, hey, we're going to do rules lawyers, I would have set you up with a Law and Order style intro. Or Daredevil, but he's like the Teutonfet or whatever they're called, the demon-looking people.
Tieflings?
See? That's the one.
Teutonfet?
I knew there was a T. I'm thinking of mummies, too.
Tutankhamun.
Well, I tried to toot in private.
None of this is usable.
Look, I think this kind of just goes to show that, like... Okay, let's just, to recount. Rules lawyering. Why do you think people do it in, like, a few sentences? And, like, does it even really matter when it's just make-believe?
Okay, there are differences between people who like the rules and rules lawyers. I want to get that off. Rules lawyers are people who try and bend the rules. Like, lawyers are not necessarily after the truth. Rules lawyers are like, well, like, one example was a character was tied up and being interrogated by a bad guy. A guy was telling a story about in the D&D when he heard that. Guy... Like, villain, like, interrogates him, it's like...
As you do.
And, like, walks away. And he's like, well, now I get an opportunity attack because he's leaving my range. It's like, you're tied up. You can't do that. The book says that I get an attack. And it's like... And for, like, apparently 2 minutes, they tried to negotiate how someone tied up at their ankles, wrists, and shoulders cannot attack someone who is 5 feet away from them.
I would have said, you can try to spit.
It's just there's stuff like that bugs me when people are like a great example would be Pierce in the D&D episode of Community, the first one where he's like, oh, he reads through the book and finds out, oh, there's a crystal lets me control a dragon, and then he says, I go down there and find this. Like, he's clearly using meta knowledge, and that's kind of something else with it. You kind of have to put on a veil of ignorance when you're playing the character. Your character doesn't know that.
So you have to be in character.
Yeah, and people who argue stuff like, if, like, there was a thing I did when we were doing Curse of Strahd. I was like, how much does my character know about vampires just walking in? And the DM, Sam, had me roll a history check just like see what you had read
Yeah.
throughout your life.
And if you get a natural 1, all you know about is ancient aliens.
You're like, well, it's like you don't even know what a vampire is. You have zero idea.
It's a history
I
chapter.
rolled not great,
Mm-hmm.
and so I had to learn a lot. But if I had rolled a character who had got like 10, like got a natural 20 on it, I would have been an expert on it. It would have been something I was very passionate about. I knew I had been studying it throughout my life, and this would basically be my wheelhouse. And then I could share that knowledge, you know? And that's...
And that influences what you make your character say and do.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of, like, almost improvised acting and stuff.
Yeah,
really.
and it's fine. But what made it kind of interesting what my character didn't know was the fact that I basically had to start searching throughout the world for people who did know what was going on. Even if some of them were just rumors. That was basically just getting to bones. So it was basically turned into a detective game in a grim, dark world.
So would you argue that that's part of why Matt Mercer and his crew, who are by and large actors of screen and video game voice acting and motion capture and such, since they've probably all taken acting classes, would you argue that that's probably something that helps feed into the entertainment value of their campaigns?
Yeah, and also what helps is the fact they all understand that the goal of the game, outside of kill the bad guy and everything, it's really just make a compelling story, just improvise
and have
together.
fun.
Yeah. Like, Campaign 3, as of recording, that's what they're on. There's one scene where a character accidentally destroys an object. Just accidentally. But because the characters have so little relationship, they're like, you did that on purpose. You lied and destroyed the thing because you wanted that thing. And there was decent reason to believe that. And so it put this wedge between them throughout, like, the next 3 episodes of them, like, fighting and stuff. Like,
Which is like 9 hours, probably.
yeah, it's not a short amount of time. And so it was like, but also these characters previously were, like, best friends. They were like, oh, we're really getting off to each other. And then it just, like, immediately put that wedge between them. And they played it really well, both characters. But that's kind of the issue. Like, if they'd been, like, the people who, like, rules lawyer and use meta knowledge, the term in D&D is usually just that guy. And so, like, they'll be like, well, my family has an ancestral +3 sword that lets me decapitate heads once a day. Like, just instantly kill someone with less than 100 health. Or they'll say, like, oh, can't I be, like, 3 levels higher because then I get access to this thing, and that fits my character better. And it's such a prolific thing that these people exist. There was one adventure, I cannot remember what it was. It was not D&D, it was a D&D-like thing. They had a class called Edgelord, where you get a katana, and it's like, if the player asks you for extra levels, just give it to him. Why not? He is probably going to be too impetulant to do it otherwise. And literally the guy telling the story about this thing, literally the kid rage quit before he was done making the character because the book was making fun of him so much and was just calling him out on all the stereotypes he was fitting into.
So a rules lawyer isn't someone who says,
Like,
these are the rules, we should stick by them. I know these rules and I'm going to manipulate them for my own betterment and gain, not necessarily the betterment and gain of the story or adventure or fun for everyone else.
Exactly.
Yeah, and there's also the issue people have with, it's called main character syndrome, where they treat themselves like they're the only character. Yeah, there's some real messed up stuff, and typically, like, I know Matt has talked about how occasionally, because he's been DMing since he was like 13.
And he's not anymore.
No, he's
He's
not.
at least 15, 18 maybe, even.
Yeah, he's an adult. But he's talked about, like, how he's had to deal with those players, and typically what you have to do is start posing moral questions to them. Like, if they are, I really want this magic item. Like, let's say...
You're like, yeah, you can have the weapon that decapitates once a day, but you have to become a eunuch.
That is kind of what he did. He was, there was a character who was like, I want, like, this magical item. He was like, great, I'm gonna take away one of the other magic items you have. I'm basically just gonna cut that magic item in half, and you can only use it, like, half as much as you could before.
It's sort of like, not to do a direct callback to the podcast that I normally host, but we talked about how I want to do a very silly, over-the-top thing that through the course of multiple drafts of like how ridiculous can I make this became, what if Alex Jones was Bible Man wielding King Arthur's sword against like
the lizard people
and Gwyneth Paltrow's new wave stuff, and then Robo Queen Elizabeth, and you know, it just every conspiracy.
Yeah, the joke was that if Alex Jones was 100% correct on all of his theories,
the hollow flat Earth,
and then he had to wield a conspiracy item to fight off other conspiracies.
But like Rorschach in the Watchmen comic and movie and all that, he does cool things, but you're not supposed to like him. He's kind of gross and smelly. He's just cold beans out of a can. He's not a cool guy. And so my idea, whenever it was to make a silly thing that people wouldn't be like, see, it's right, we should rise up against the reptoids, they're really there, was like, oh, wouldn't it be funny if he got all this Giga Chad power, but the cost was he had to be like a eunuch or something. Like, I was like, what's something that no one would, it ruins the power fantasy of being this guy. So that just made me think of someone's like, but I want to be the protagonist of the story. It's like, cool, you can have this, but it'll do this to you. Well, and they're like, oh, you have to eat one human child per day to maintain your power.
Well, one idea that I would throw, and I've seen done, is like, you have to break into this house, steal this magic item.
Mm-hmm.
You know? You break into the place, you realize it's not some fortress. It's just this elderly couple that's like, please don't hurt us. And the magic item you're taking is basically the thing that you use to, like, be able to put food on the table.
The other thing is, at some point, you have to learn to pivot with whenever your players get what the people call murder hobo. You gotta learn to pivot a little bit when those things happen, when they're just like, well, I want the magic item, so I'll kill the person who has it. You've got to learn to think about a way, like, I always try to adopt a way that doesn't necessarily just turn on them and go, you did a wrong thing. That's something for just a frank conversation out of game, usually, for me.
Mm-hmm.
If I have that, I just use the fact, well, it's a logistical world. They just murdered someone. That's going to be investigated. And eventually, if they keep murdering people, someone's going to be like, some guy's going to come up to them and be like, hey, have you heard anything about these murders that have been happening? And they're going to start having problems.
So, I know this, since I don't know D&D, and I'm not a DM, GM, AMC, HBCDB, DVD.
DMV.
But if there were people like, we really were itching for some killing, I would be like, oh, there's this mystical monastery full of these demon samurai that you could go fight and maybe find the spoils. But then after they do and they get it and they undo the power of this wizard lord or whatever, they look back and realize that sort of a Dr. Eggman situation, all those samurai were actually just like babies and toddlers that had been kidnapped and wrapped in like a curse, and they just slaughtered like 100 babies, and they would have to live with that. And that would pretty drastic. Like whenever you bombed that mental hospital from the Flapjack.
This is going to require so much context.
I think it's better without it. And I was like, oh my, I can't believe you've done that.
You said pull lever. This is all out of character.
Future me. Edit all of this out.
Harlan Ballister.
That voice is racially insensitive.
How is it racially insensitive? It's a southern voice. I'm basing it off Foghorn Leghorn, who was a chicken.
Yeah. Oh, which makes no sense. He would be a rooster if he was a boy.
Anyway.
Wait, he did have a rooster's tail. It checks out. You're on... Okay. Well, I'll allow it for now, but you're on mighty thin ice.
And also, my character didn't know what the lever did.
Oh, but he's the one who pulled the lever. He killed them.
You
he
said
has to live
pull
with
the
that.
lever.
Yeah, but he chose to do what I say. Just following orders didn't stop anyone at The Hague. I'm sorry.
The Hague was an opera museum in the 1800s.
No.
And it's where many waffles were made. It's the birthplace of ice cream.
Anyway. So
it's actually where that one song, Hague, Hague, you, I don't like your girlfriend.
I think that's a good place to end this whole story.
I don't think we've gotten anything usable out of this.
You did. You explained what a rules lawyer was to me and sort of like...
I think maybe 13 seconds.
Protagonist syndrome is real and it sucks.
Yeah, I don't want to use any of this.
Okay, cool. Well, this has been D&Dummies. We've been the Dummies. D, do you have anything to say as we close out?
I don't want any of this on my channel. This is so nonsense.
Well, maybe it'll be a backdoor pilot that I put on the Nuclear Heart Podcast channel.